Welcome back to NTD. The Trump administration is calling on nations around the world to support what it calls trade over aid, prioritizing increased economic relations with developing countries over financial aid. According to the Washington Post, Secretary of State Marco Rubio sent a wire to all U.S. embassies asking them to petition their host nations to join the initiative. Joining us now is Rod Martin, political analyst and founder and CEO of Martin Capital. Rod, it's good to have you back on the show. Now, this U.S. initiative will be introduced at the United Nations. Yep, good to see you. This initiative is going to be introduced at the United Nations at the end of April. UN Ambassador Mike Walls says, quote, "Let's lower barriers to capital, drive foreign investment, and create jobs, not dependency." And we're calling that trade over aid. So what do you make of this push, Rod?
Well, this is part of the remaking of American foreign policy that Donald Trump has been rolling out now for over a year. This is really quite an extraordinary thing in comparison to the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, which turned out to just be a series of debt traps to capture these countries in a neo-colonial fashion. And also the West's preferred socialist version of aid, which looks nothing so much as the welfare situation in Detroit or the south side of Chicago. It's a dependency trap of its own kind, not where we debt trap them like the Chinese, not where they get forced to our will, but they just never, ever get out of poverty. The entire Western aid establishment has been committed to economic principles that make no sense in the real world. So what Trump and Rubio are doing here is extraordinary. The idea, just as with NATO, just as with the commerce, not chaos speech in Saudi Arabia, the aim here is to make real partners, not dependents. There's no reason for an African country with all the wealth that so many of those countries have to continue to be basically a welfare dependent of the West forever and ever, amen, when in fact they can be prosperous capitalist countries that make a brilliant, prosperous future for their people. And that's exactly what we're out to do here.
Now, Rod, critics of this policy talk about the importance of aid, say, to prevent things like the spread of contagious viruses. So, is this a call for an end to aid or more of a reprioritization away from aid?
Oh, very much a reprioritization. There are times when you need to help people. We have those times here in America too. My house was blown away by Hurricane Ivan in 2004. I was super happy that FEMA was there. We exist in part to help each other out, and we should do that as a country, and that's a good thing. But most of the time, most of the poverty we see around the world isn't from some kind of disaster, unless you count bad government as a disaster. Countries that have no private property rights worth mentioning, countries that have actually abolished private property outright, countries that have no legal system sufficient to support business formation by small business owners who could build a future for their families. And what the president wants to do here is to move away from that model where we just pile up aid boxes like the ones you're showing on screen on docks somewhere for some corrupt regime to loot and hand to its favored factions, and instead actually build an economic future for all these people. There is no reason that someone in Ethiopia or South Africa or Nigeria or Ghana shouldn't have the standard of living that we have here in Florida or in Texas. There is no reason at all except bad government, bad economics, and a foreign aid model that encourages and sustains dependency.
So talk about that future and the potential impact of this trade over aid policy. What does it mean for these less developed nations and those living there?
Well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to reduce trade barriers. We're going to reduce import restrictions. We're going to do a range of things that are aimed at encouraging these folks to develop indigenous economies that matter, that build prosperity for the future. Now, Are we going to expect some things in return for that? Absolutely. We're going to want access to their markets for American producers. And we're certainly going to want them to be friendly to us. We don't want them to be our enemies or sponsoring terrorism in Mississippi. But within reasonable parameters, we can be a friend and not merely a patron. And they can actually be a partner and not just a client. And as we build up their economies together, we start to see a very different aid model, one that looks a lot more like Germany and Japan and the rest of Western Europe after World War II, where we built these countries into self-sustaining, prosperous places that people would want to live and have a future and could stand on their own 2 feet and field a military that could help us defend them against the Soviets or the Chinese or whomever. There's no reason for any country in this world to continue to be a basket case, especially since Western aid compassion, quote unquote, has actually facilitated a lot of that long-term dependency. We have to get past the model where we're constantly being not a sugar daddy so much as some kind of white knight that comes in and just takes care of all the problems in the world. You can give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day. You can teach a man to fish and he can build a business for his family and a tax base for his government and a future for his continent. And that's what we want to do here.
Rod, I want to just push back on what you're saying just a bit. This is basically what we tried with China in 1999, allowing China to join the World Trade Organization, thinking that free fair trade with China would spread U.S. democratic values, and instead we got the exact opposite: deep partnerships, Chinese agents deeply embedded in all different parts of our society. With the regime in charge that wants to become the hegemon while committing genocide against multiple groups in their own country, right? So how do we avoid that kind of thing from happening going forward, with other nations?
Well, that's the right question to ask. But the big point that is missed in that is that China succeeded. It was kind of stupid for us to build a global geopolitical rival. But the truth of the matter is, China is phenomenally better off than it was before and doesn't need a lot of U.S. foreign aid anymore. When my parents were kids, their parents scolded them for not cleaning their plate at dinner because don't you know there are starving children in China? Well, there aren't a lot of starving children in China anymore. And in fact, we have a childhood obesity problem in West Africa these days. So if you can actually build a good economy in a country that doesn't have 1.4 billion people, isn't ruled by the Communist Party of China, isn't seeking global hegemony over the United States and its friends, then that's a completely different thing. Like I said, that looks more like what happened in Japan and Germany and Korea and Taiwan and France and Britain after the war. And that's a beautiful thing. Those are all countries that we might have arguments with from time to time, but they are not a threat to global peace. They are not a danger to the global order. They are allies and partners in most things. I'd like the NATO guys to do a little bit more on defense, but in general, this is a much more stable world because those countries became free and prosperous. We want to extend that throughout Latin America and Africa and Asia.
All right, Rod, let's just switch gears quickly to the Middle East, because I know you're watching the situation there very carefully. Are you confident the U.S. and Iran will reach a deal this week, as the president seems to be?
If I were betting, I would say we won't. I believe, as I have told you several times, that the peace talks, while certainly in good faith, certainly we would love to reach a deal if we could, are being negotiated with a regime that barely exists, that is splintered into factions. There's a reason they sent 70 people to Islamabad last week. It's because none of those people trust each other and they're all looking over each other's shoulder. And we had an instance yesterday where the IRGC actually put out a statement in public that the Iranian foreign minister is, quote, an idiot. They are actively fighting with each other out loud in public. And Donald Trump has done a lot to bring that to pass. Also, in the course of the ceasefire, what we've seen is they are trying to consolidate their weapons, pull them out of this mountain, stick them in this better location, blah, blah, blah. Well, we're tracking all that. We've got incredible assets on the ground. We've got satellite data. We're seeing where they're putting all the stuff we didn't already hit at just the moment that the USS Ford and its carrier strike group, the USS Bush and its carrier strike group, the USS Boxer and its Marine Expeditionary Unit all converge on the region. And we're going to have the largest armada in the history of the American Navy, at least since Leyte Gulf, off Iran, able to pound these guys into submission. And my guess is a deal won't be possible, but what will happen is we'll reach a point where the people are able to rise up and Iran can be free.
All right. Political analyst Rod Martin, thank you so much. It's good to have you on the show again.
Thank you.